Hello and welcome to Tell Muses, a storytelling podcast with storytellers, for anyone interested in stories and all about the wonderful art of oral storytelling. Today we've got with us the wonderful Tom Muir from Orkney. Hello, Tom, and thank you so much for being with us.
Hello, well, thank you for asking me. I always kind of think, sitting on a small group of islands off the north coast of Scotland, I never expected anybody's ever heard of me, so it always comes as a great surprise when anybody expresses an interest or actually says that they know who they've heard of me, so.
I think that is because usually you're the host, Tom. That is why it comes as a surprise to you. And speaking of which, I do know a few things about you. I want to learn a lot more. But before I do that, I would like to ask you a very broad question, and you can take it anywhere you like. Would you please tell people listening who Tom Muir is?
That's a question. I was born on a small farm in the east mainland of Orkney. Getting to be quite a long time ago now. I was born in 1963. And so I was a farm boy, but I'm dyslexic, so school was not exactly a pleasure or a rewarding experience for either of us. And but I strayed into archaeology when I was 17 and was always had an interest in folk tales. But there were no Orkney folk tales, and I thought that there weren't any Orkney folk tales. And then I discovered, to my amazement, that there was a man called Walter Dennison from the island of Sandy, which was the island in the north where my father came from, who collected stories in the 19th century. And I ended up working at the museum, the main museum in Orkney, and we did an exhibition on Dennison, and I was pulled in to write it. And I didn't write because I'm dyslexic. I avoided writing, but I gathered together the stories, wrote an exhibition about him, which led to me then doing that basically ever since. That was 1994. A collection of his work was published, and my boss at the museum had been an artist. He was an art teacher before he got into museums. And I dragged him out of retirement to do illustrations for the exhibition, and he wanted to carry on doing drawings but needed a reason. And so I said, well, I've been waiting my whole life for a book of Orkney folk tales, and it's not coming, and nobody's working in folklore. So I set to find all the stories I could and publish them, which is a book called Mermaid Bride and Other Orkney Folk Tales. It came out in 1998, and it's still in print. And then that sort of one thing led to another, and I was telling stories, have been for about 36 years or so. But I didn't actually know that there was anybody else telling stories. I was just sitting here on an island telling the stories from my culture. And it came as a surprise to discover that there was like this whole world out there of people telling stories and festivals, which I'd never heard of. And so I stumbled into that around 2000, and the rest is history. I've just sort of always gone with the flow in life, rather than never had any plans, never any, goals of by this age I have to be doing this, or, I never bothered with that. So I just sort of like Jack in the stories. I just go along the trail and see where it leads me. So that is me in a nutshell.
And Tom, I've noticed, throughout the years, that Scottish people are really attached to their land. So yeah, you really love Scotland. Scottish people really love Scotland, and I can see why. And I was wondering, um, how is it to tell stories, lots of stories from the place where you were born, and to research stories from Orkney in this case, in this particular case, and when you tell stories from Orkney, how does it feel for you to tell these stories and know that you're telling stories from your land and your roots?
It's an absolute privilege. In a word, that is what it is. It's very privileged to be able to do that. Orkney, I should explain, is a group of about 70 islands off the northeast tip of Scotland. But we've only been part of Scotland since 1468. And seems we have lots of Neolithic and Mesolithic monuments. Well, not Mesolithic monuments because they didn't build monuments, but lots of Neolithic monuments here. 1468 is not that long ago, you know. But we're part of Norway, so we were the Viking part of Scotland, which makes us a bit different. So, you know, there was no Gaelic, there was no kilt wearing, that sort of thing. But we had our own customs and traditions and stories. And the stories tend to be a mixture of Celtic and Scandinavian. And as well as some Orkney things that are just, you know, Orkney and don't seem to fit in anywhere else. But no, it's a great honor, really, because it feels so personal, because the stories here tend to be very specific to a site. So you can point to a mound and say there were trolls, you know, fairy folk living in that mound. That's where the fiddler went in and played and came out 14 years and a day later when he thought he'd been in there for a few hours. You know, that's the rock that a mermaid sat on. That's where the man saw a silky woman. You know, they're very site specific. So it does make it a bit, you know, it's not just once upon a time in a land far, far away, you know. It's right over there. You see that bit of mound over there? Well, that's where the story happened. So I have actually just written a book called Tales in the Landscape for the Orkney mainland, and we'll do the North and South Isles as well. And it's got a mixture of all these stories, folk tales, saga stories, and just stories, things that happened, interesting things, little anecdotes. So, yeah, it's for me, it's a great, like I said, a great privilege to be able to tell these stories and to share them, which is more important. There's no point having something good if you're then just going to keep it to yourself and nobody else gets to enjoy it or experience it. You know, that's too much of that in the world as it is. Doesn't need me joining in.
Well, stories are meant to be told and shared.
Yeah.
That's the whole point. We've had a friend of yours in season 1 of our podcast, right? You do know the lovely lady Fran Fled
Oh yeah.
Ollenrake.
We we run a little, well, we did run a little storytelling festival together. It's kind of fizzled out a bit this year, but yeah, no, me and Fran are old friends and have worked on the festivals, and you know, and this is the HQ for it in me and my wife's home here. So you know, yeah, I
So
know Fran very well.
I take it you and Fran live on the same Orkney Island, yes?
Yeah, we live on the mainland, which is the largest island. So it's like a sort of a large island with a lot of group of smaller islands to the north and south of it. So yeah, we're old friends.
You know, when you first started talking about yourself, and you said, you know, I was born here, I was born on a farm, so I started as a farm boy. And then you told us about the Norway and how you never had most common English peoples on that land. The moment you said I was born on a farm, I thought, well, yes, I was Ragnar Lothbrok, you know.
Oh, we're close kin, me and Ragnar, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, Orkney is a very kind of agricultural place, and so it's it's no big surprise to be born on a farm. The farm I was born on, it's in the East Mainland. It's a parish called Tankerness, and the farm I was born on is called Valdigar, and it translates, I am told, by someone who studies this on the University of Iceland. Said it means the farm of Valdis. So Valdis was a Viking who broke out that land. Although there would have been a Pict there before, and then there would have been a Bronze Age person and a Neolithic person, and it's we own land as a term. I always think that we're just the guardians of a piece of land, and it will be passed on, and it should be respected as well for everything that lives on it, not just what you're growing or what your animals you're rearing, but everything. I mean, when I was a kid, my greatest pleasure was going out in the springtime and finding the birds' nests and just looking at the eggs and admiring them, and then marking the nest with a stick nearby, but not too near to frighten the mother, and then go back and just keep an eye on them until they hatched out and away they went. So very much kind of in tune with nature. That's the way I was reared, So.
Now, we have an image of what Tom looks like and where he is, but people who are listening cannot see that on the background, right behind Tom's back, is a corner bookcase filled with the most beautiful books. Simona was talking about it earlier, and I know that you have the Orkneyology Press.
Mm-hmm.
It is a publishing house, is that right? Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
That was another one of these strange, happenings. About the early part of the millennium, about sort of 2002, working at the museum, there was a woman got in touch with me called Rhonda Brunet, who was writing a young adult fantasy novel about a selkie woman, a seal that can take off a skin and become a human. And she had been looking this up online and had found a place called Rackwick in Hoy, which is a very, very beautiful bay in Orkney, which has got large boulders in it, but they're all striped, different colours. And then there's a pink sand beach, and then there's huge towering red sandstone cliffs on either side. And it was a little fishing farming community. And reckoning that Selkie stories originated around Orkney, and then finding this place, she wanted to set it there around 1900, but she needed information about about life in Orkney at that time. So she was in touch with the archives, and then she was put in touch with me. Now, she'd already got an interlibrary loan of the book Mermaid Bride, and so I was giving her advice, and then after a while the emails stopped, and didn't think anything about it because it's just another person in touch asking questions. It's what I did for a living. But then she got back in touch in 2014, and we got talking, and then we got talking on Skype, and then one thing led to another, and ended up we fell in love. And she came over to Orkney in 2015 and spent a while so that we got to know each other, because we'd spoken for 4 hours online, on a Skype call, 4 hours every night. So we knew everything about each other. And also, it's impossible to sustain any lies if you're going to say, well, I'm actually the Earl of Orkney, and I live in a castle, and that's well, the internet spoils those things these days, because you just look it up and you go, no, he doesn't. But anyway, we got to know each other extremely well before we even met, and we were married in the beginning of 2016. So we've been married for 10 years. Now, she came from upstate New York, near the border with Canada, and well, Western New York. She would always point that out. That's not upstate, it's Western. But she started the website orkneyology.com, which was going to be about places to go in Orkney and things to see and a bit of the history. And then there was folklore found its way in there as well, of course. And then it's become more a kind of an archive these days of things, of interesting things. And she suggested that we start publishing our own books. And then a friend of mine, Bryce, who had been my boss and who did the artwork for Mermaid Bride, asked if we would publish his autobiography. And so we said, yeah, okay. So we did that. And then, of course, the floodgates opened when people heard that there was somebody publishing books. And so we've started doing that in a very small scale, but we have 10 books out now, including some, most of them are about Orkney, but some of them are folk tales. There's a story harvest by David Campbell, who is a very well-known elder statesman of Scottish storytelling. There's The Madman's Window by Colin Irwin, who was a fabulous storyteller and singer-songwriter. And it's his take on old stories. So from around the coast of County Antrim in Northern Ireland. We've just at the beginning of this year had a book called Myths in Isolation by Catherine Souter, who is an artist that was doing an illustration for a mythological creature for every letter of the alphabet during lockdown, when she was, nothing else to do. And I suggested that she had put stories to them and turn it into a book. And so lots of people offered stories. I did S's for Selkie, of course, set in Rackwick, naturally. And so it ended up that we published that as well. That came out on the 1st of January this year. And then just last Friday, on the 30th of January, we did have a book out between then as well. It's not even. We have this absolutely beautiful book called A Garment for the Moon, Tales from a Grandmother's Lips by Shonalee Cumbers. So it's a collection of Jewish folk tales illustrated by Catherine. So absolutely gorgeous thing.
I'm gonna get that. I'm gonna get that. Because I was thinking about ordering
Beautiful.
it, but I'm visiting England in June. I'll go to
Mm-hmm.
the East Anglian Festival, and sweet, sweet Marion Lipper is going to bring one for me, and she just wants to give it as a gift. So I'm very excited.
It's a beautiful, beautiful book. I'm not saying that because we published it. I'm saying it because the stories are gorgeous. And the illustrations are exquisite, beautiful, full color illustrations, absolutely gorgeous. So it's a real treasure, and as well as an excellent read. So we've been doing that, and I've also been writing. I wrote 2 books last year because I retired from the museum. I took early retirement because I nearly died a couple of years ago, and I thought, well, that sucks. because you don't know when your number's up. So I thought, I want to do something now that I want to do. Loved working in the museum, gained so much from it, can't fault it at all. But it was just time for something new. And so I wrote a collection of Scottish folk tales of love for the History Press, which came out at the beginning of this year as well. Illustrated by a friend of mine, Hester Asplund, who is just the most exquisite artist. Really detailed drawings, beautiful things. And I've also just finished writing this book, Tales in the Landscape, as I mentioned. So, as well as working on other people's books too. So, yeah, there's plenty to fill the days with.
And Tom, all this talk of stories and collection of folk tales and stuff, do you think maybe it's time to tell us a little story? Would you like to?
I could do indeed. Do you have anything that you particularly like? I mean,
Orkney, obviously.
Oh yeah, it'll be Orkney, but I'm just
I don't know,
wondering.
giants?
We have a story about a giant. They're not that common
Ah,
because Orkney is a very flat landscape,
uh-huh.
which doesn't lend itself very well to giants.
No, you have to carry stones and then throw them,
They
drop
do a lot of
them so
that.
you have giants. Yeah,
Mm.
right. Well,
But
you choose them.
we did have a giant who didn't come from Orkney. He lived in Caithness, which is across the Pentland Firth. It's the north part of Scotland, the northeast part of Scotland. And this giant used to look across to Orkney, which is very flat and very fertile, very green. And he thought the soil there looked so rich, so good. And he had a little garden. And he thought, I could do with some of that earth for my garden. Imagine what I could grow with good, rich, fertile soil. So he took a casey, which is a straw basket, a woven straw basket, that fits on your back like a backpack. And it has a strap that goes around your chest called a fettle, which holds the thing onto your back. And he waded across the Pentland Firth. Now, he was so huge that the water only came up to his knees. And he walked over to Orkney. He saw an area that looked like a really fine piece of ground, fertile. He set down his casey, and with one of his huge hands, he scooped up a great gouge of earth, and he tipped it into the casey. And then with his other hand, he took another great scoop of earth, and he tipped it into the casey. And it left two great holes in the surface of the earth, and water flowed into the holes, and it formed the lochs of Stennis and Harry, which is the two largest lakes in Orkney. And then he set off home. Now, as he was going, a big lump of turf fell off the top of the casey and fell into the sea with a splash. And it remains there to this day as an island called Gramesy. And then he got just a little further when disaster struck because the fettle, the band of his casey broke, and all the earth came tumbling down, and it made the hills Ahoy, which is the two highest hills in Orkney. And then he was so upset by that, he went home, and he never bothered coming back for any more. But we have still got the hills Ahoy, we've got Gramesy, and we've got the lochs. So that's quite common with, stories about giants creating landscapes. But between that thin strip between the two lochs, there is a stone circle called the Ring of Brodgar, which is Neolithic. So it's about 5,000 years old. And they said that those were originally giants that gathered to dance at night under the moonlight because they couldn't be out during the day because they would be turned to stone. So they gathered there, and there was a fiddle player standing in the field next to them playing away. And they all started to dance in a great circle. And they went round and round and round in this great circle, dancing away. And they were having so much fun, enjoying themselves so much, that they didn't notice that the sun was starting to rise, and they were all turned to stone. And there they remain as the Ring of Brodgar. And there's a stone in the field next to it called the Comet Stone, which was the fiddle player. So, proof. Also, just down from there is the site, the Nessa Brodgar, which has had a lot of attention over the last 25 years. Huge Neolithic site. So, yeah, so lots of those little things.
It's brilliant. And it's brilliant to see how these stories connect to the landscape so much. And I was thinking, but this may just me overthinking, because I know that one of the main characteristics of houses in Orkney in the Neolithic period is that they were round. And I was thinking maybe about a storyteller sitting and telling stories in these round houses. I don't know if it's just my imagination or if you connected it as well, or if there's something.
Absolutely. No, I mean, storytelling is the oldest art form, you know. There has been stories as long as there's been language. As long as people have been able to communicate with each other, they would have told stories. And so I would love to be able to go back, having a background in archaeology as well, to be able to go back to sites like Skara Brae, where there is Neolithic houses, and be able to turn back that clock about 5,000 to 5,200 years and sneak in and eavesdrop. Wouldn't do me any damn good, because I wouldn't understand a word they were saying, because they would have their own language, which we have no concept of. But you would be able to tell if somebody was telling a story and whether they were any good at it and how the people were responding. But yeah, people would have always told stories.
You know, other than being storytellers, Simona and I do the same job. We are both English teachers as a foreign language. So, from an educator's point of view, I find it fascinating that, having studied on the wrong leg as a dyslexic student in school, you ended up publishing books and writing books. I mean, you know, you just crossed to the other side.
I've never made life any easy for myself. I was always assured by a teacher when I was a kid that I was an absolute waste of space and would amount to nothing. I've actually got a scar on my face from a teacher from a very minor thing. I was talking in class when I was about 8, because we didn't understand the sum, if you know, I mean, the sums of mathematics. There was a mathematical problem was put up on the blackboard. We had no idea how the hell to solve it, because it was division. We'd never done division, hadn't a clue. So I was talking to the guy sitting next to me. It's just like whispering into the ear, trying to figure out what it was we were meant to be doing, and got smacked across the face with a ruler, you know, one of those wooden rulers for measuring. And I've still got the scar down there. So, you know, it was, yeah, school was never a happy experience for me. And I actually buggered off when I was 14, never went back again. So stumbling into archaeology was the best thing that could have happened, because that's what led to everything, you know. The job at the museum, writing Mermaid Bride, becoming a storyteller, and ultimately meeting Rhonda, who had got that book, you know. We both had been married before and both had kids, but we always kind of looked on that as being a trial, you know, sort of first attempt. But this is the real deal. So no disrespect meant, but you know, it's when you find somebody that you really connect with, and that's very special. And that was why, I mean, we have the story up on the website about how we met, and I was asked to do an interview by the History Press, who had published an anthology of Scottish folk tales, because I had already written a book for them called Orkney Folk Tales, and they had taken a couple of stories out of that, put it into an anthology of Scottish folk tales. That had sold well, so they did a volume 2. And the woman from the Sunday Post newspaper in Scotland had read our love story and wanted to kind of focus on that, how folk tales had brought together two people from either side of the Atlantic Ocean. And that is what led to me being asked to write this collection of folk tales of love. So that's what I did. So everything's interconnected, everything joins up, you know. But I do a lot of work in schools, and I have lectured in universities as well, by the way, in Aberdeen, Copenhagen, Ljubljana. But I do a lot of work in schools, and I always tell them, you know, like, never give up. If you can't do something, it's not the end of the world, but, you know, things can happen, you know. So I always encourage them, and it's lovely that now folktales, which had been at one time completely dismissed in Orkney society as being just superstitious rubbish, you know, and was squashed by the church and by science, and now it's being taught in schools as a method of communication, writing their own stories, but also telling stories as well. So it's a communication skill of getting up, maybe a couple a year, which always works better, who come up with a story between them, and then they split it up so that one does one bit and one does another bit, you know. And some of the stuff they come up with is just amazing, you know. But it's so lovely that they actually really, you know, that folk tales is now in the curriculum in both the primary and secondary schools. So the young ones and the older kids, both of them have opportunities to work with that. And so I suppose if I ever, you know, if I did one thing in my life, it was kind of worthwhile. It was getting those stories back into people's mouths, and they're told all over the place now. So, but I mean, you know, schools these days obviously are nothing like schools were in the 1960s and 70s.
Oh, yes, luckily.
Black and white.
Education has changed fundamentally, I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
And at least I believe that more people care about students with learning difficulties nowadays. We do not disregard it any longer. And it is quite common. Superstition is out of the window. Even the hardest parents who still consider it to be some kind of defection on their kid and are negative at first get to see how common it is and decide to help their children, luckily. But I think that both Simone and I have found out by implementing storytelling in our language teaching that one of the most important skills that children learn, and some of them relearn, is not the culture that's passed on, it's not tradition, it's not the heritage that's not to be missed, it's the actual art of listening. Because I mean, attentive listening, because we're so overwhelmed with the speed of technology and pictures and scrolling on our phones all the time. We have very short attention spans. And this thing, working with storytelling with these children, I haven't done much work in secondary school. I've reached up to primary with stories, but I see that for some of them, it is the first time that they actually do not lose their attention. If they know they have to take the story and then retell it or work with it, they stay focused. And that's, to me, the most important skill.
I got phone calls at the museum from a teacher saying, would I come out and, tell stories to the kids and such a date or whatever. And I said, yeah, of course, yeah, happy to do that. And then you would hear them say, I think I should just warn you. And I say, look, I'll stop there. I said, the kid that you're going to warn me about is probably the one that's going to get the most out of this. Because it's different. It's not schoolwork. You're not sitting there, with your whatever they use these days. It was like chotters and pencils in my day, but they're not sitting there doing work. They're sitting listening to a story. And I remember being stopped by one kid on the way out who said, can I get another story? Because he was actually on the way of walking out of the room. There was like a line of kids. And I very quickly told him that one about the dancing giants at the Ring of Broadcom. And he went away delighted. And the teachers went, I've never seen him sit so, I've never seen him sit quietly for so long before. How did you do that? So I didn't do it. It's just like stories did it, But yeah, different people get different things from it, and I think that it's an important part of a curriculum because it, like I said, you can use it for anything. You can use it as an art project. You can use it for creative writing and for communication skills. For pieces of music, you can. It lends itself to everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I had the same experience with children who, when I got into the classroom, for example, were standing up and moving around, and then they were the most spellbound to the story when I was telling the story. And the same thing, like with a group that I'm teaching this year. There's this kid who, when I entered the room, the teacher approached and said, "Oh, there's this kid. Uh, we will see how he reacts to what you're doing, etc." And you just need to be a little different, and they just start expressing themselves, and are so into what you're doing, and you just need to find the right key to work with everybody, and storytelling is just amazing with that, I think.
It does bring a lot into the it adds a lot to the mix, and it's an absolute privilege if you got a group of kids that are sitting there listening. It's great, and you always try to involve them as well, and so yeah, it's. I think all schools should have storytelling and all these amazing stories because well, Italy and Greece. I think you've got a few stories out there as well, the odd bit of mythology as well, you know.
Well, I
Wonderful.
wanted to comment on that because you said how folktales were disregarded, especially with the spread of Christianity. You know, they were totally against it because it would be representative of the old gods, I guess, or stuff like that, you know. But even though the same thing happened to Greece, it was even worse because of all the old script that had been saved one way or another through different cultures. The Greeks felt so empowered and so proud of their ancestry that they disregarded folk legacy for decades. It was considered, you know, old women's tales or suitable just for kids or looked down upon compared to the myths, you know. They would never get to the height of the great poems. And, you know, people failed to realize that they didn't need to. They were something totally different. And it was representative of the people who were living it.
I mean, folk tales are exactly what they said, folk tales. They are the tales of the people. That is what they're telling by the fireside. And it's a way of explaining the world around them. It's a way of teaching examples as well. My favourite story, I have to confess, doesn't come from Orkney, comes from Shetland, which is the next group of islands north. Well, the only other group, well, yeah, it's Faroes, but they're a long way away in a different country. But it's about caring, it's about sharing, and it's a wonderful moral tale without being preachy. And I always try to get that one in at schools because these days the world is becoming such a self-centered, selfish, you know, the not ordinary people really, but people in charge, you know. It's all about me. It's all about what's in it for me. What can I get out of it? And this is actually about caring and sharing, and I think it's absolutely beautiful for that. And I think it's a lesson that everybody should hear, you know. So that's why I tell it whenever I get a possibility of getting it in there in schools and all that. I always tell
Oh,
it.
come on, Tom. Now I'm intrigued. Simona, would you like us to turn ourselves into little school kids
Yes,
and
please.
listen to that
I
story?
was thinking the same. If you hadn't asked, I would have I would have asked.
He did it
Well,
on
Please.
purpose, you know. He just hooked us like it accidentally.
it's like I said, it's a story from Shetland. See, I heard this years ago from a very, very dear friend of mine, Lawrence Tulloch. And Lawrence was a great storyteller from the island of Yell. And he had learned his stories from his father, who had learnt them from his mother, who had learnt them from her father, I think it was. I mean, this tradition goes back for generations. But this particular story he had from a man called George P.S. Peterson from the island of Papastour. And it's called Mali and the Trow. No, a trow. I hope you've not heard the story. I don't know if it's... No. A trow is the name in the North Isles for the fairy folk. Now, usually they live in mounds. They have a tendency to steal your babies and leave changelings in their place, and or steal your cattle and leave a piece of wood enchanted to look like a dead cow, which you would then bury, and they would be off for the real one. So this story shows them in a slightly different light. Now, Molly was a woman who was married to a man called Robbie, who was a sailor. Now, they had 4 bairns, 4 children. And he would sign up on a ship every year, and he would sail off. And he would come back at the end of the year with enough money to fill the meal gurnal with meal. Now, that was a large wooden chest, and it was filled with ground flour, which could be packed down solid to make bannocks with, to make flat bread. And he would also buy a barrel of salted herring. And that's what they would eat on for the winter until he signed on, went back to another ship, sailed around, came back. But one year he didn't come back, and she never saw him again. She never found out what happened to him, but she knew that he must be dead. The ship must have sank, or maybe he fell from the mast, or died of disease. She didn't know, but Robbie never came back. And the pickled herring, the salted herring, was finished. And the meal gurnal was empty, and there was no food in the house. And after a few days of nothing, Molly took a staff in her hand and put a kishie on her back, which is the Shetland equivalent of a casey here, a woven basket. Put that on her back, and she set off with her 4 bairns to go begging. Now she went up the hill where there was an old woman who lived, and she knocked on the door, and the old woman came to it and said, "What do you want?" Now this old woman, it was well known that this old woman had plenty of everything. She was not short of a few coins, and she was also, had plenty of food in the house. And the oldest boy was looking in behind her, and he could see that there was a press in the house. Now, a press was a cupboard where the food was stored before refrigerators and all that. And he could see it was full of bread and cheese and butter. There was hams, there was puddings and pies, and there was all sorts of things. And he was like, his mouth was watering. He thought, I wonder what we'll get to eat. We'll get a bit of bread and butter, maybe a slice of that ham to fry. And he was getting really excited at the prospect. And Molly had said to the woman, "I'm really, really sorry that it's come to this. But my man's was a sailor. He's been lost at sea, and we're hungry. We have no money. We have no food. And I've come to ask if you could spare us something to eat. The bairns are crying. They haven't eaten for a couple of days." And the boy's looking up eagerly at the old woman. And the old woman just looks at them and says, "I'm a poor old woman. I've got nothing to give to the likes of you." And she slams the door in their face. Now, as they were walking away, the oldest boy, now he was about 12 years old at the time, he didn't want his mother to see him crying, but he couldn't help it. This hot tears were running down his cheeks, and he says, "Did you see that? Did you see what that old woman had in the house? She had a press there. It was full of bread and cheese and butter and hams and puddings and pies and all sorts of things, and yet she wouldn't give us so much as a crust of bread, and us starving. How could she do that?" And Molly says, "Well, son, that's just her way. Some people share and some people don't. But I want you to remember this, son. We are better than that. We always share." So she went down to the house. She put the children to bed in the hope that they might fall asleep and forget about the hunger that was gnawing in their belly for a short time. And she settled down by the side of the fire to start sewing. Now, there was a knock at the door, unusual in those days because people just usually walked in and said hello. But she went over to the door and she opened it, and there was a tiny little old man, no bigger than about 4-year-old, but with long grey hair, a long grey moustache and beard, and bushy eyebrows and twinkling black eyes. And she knew that this was a trow. This was one of the fairy folk. And she says, can I help you? And he said, oh, have pity on me. I'm a poor old man. He said, I've been on the road all day walking. I'm exhausted and I'm hungry. Could I come in and spend the night and maybe get a wee bite to eat? And she says, oh, I'm sorry, you've come to the wrong house. You see, we don't have any food. But if you carry on going down the road a few miles, he said, oh, no, I couldn't walk another step, he said. Can I at least come in and rest for the night? And she goes, of course you can, of course. Come in. So he went in and she sat him by the side of the fire. Now there was a big fire blazing of peats. Now peats is a turf. It's what you cut for fuel here. It's just rotted down vegetation from, well, over thousands of years, actually. And you dry it and then you burn it in your fire. So she had a good old fire going anyway, and he was looking around and he could see that there was like 4 noses over the edge of the bed and 4 pairs of eyes looking at him. And the bairns got up to see who the stranger was, and they joined their mother. And the old man says, well, come on, woman, he says, you must have something to eat. I mean, you can't have nothing. And she says, well, I'll do my best. So she went over to the meal gun and she opened the lid. And of course it was empty. But she got a knife and she scraped down the seams in the corners. And there was some bits of mouldy flour that had stuck in it, and it was sort of growing a bit mouldy. And she scraped that down, she scraped the sides, and she brought it all together, got a bunch of feathers as a duster, and she swept it all up into a little mound. And it was all this sort of old, crusty, mouldy flour with bits of wood shavings in it and cobwebs as well from the scraping the side. But she put it all into a bowl like it was gold dust. She went over to the barrel where the salted herring had been. Now, of course, there was no herring left, but she took some of the salty water with some of the fish scales in it and she poured it into the bowl as well, and then she stirred it up until it was a kind of a paste, like sort of wallpaper paste consistency. And then she very carefully measured it out into 6 cups. 1 for the trow, 1 each for the children and 1 for herself. Now, the bairns, of course, hadn't eaten for a couple of days, and they wolfed this down like it was the finest food. But the old trow wasn't so keen. He looked in it with a disgusted look on his face, and he says, points, and he says, what's that stuff? That stuff, she says, is the only food we have in the house. Ah, well, he says, you'll have some good strong home-brewed ale, though. And she says, oh, no, I don't have any ale. She said, if I had barley, I wouldn't waste making beer with it. I'd make bread for the bairns, she says. But we do have a good sweet well, she says. We've got plenty of well water. You can have a drink of water. Nah, never touch this stuff, he says. Well, the one thing we do have plenty of, though, she says, is peats. So don't be cold. You can sleep in the chair by the fire there. And if you're waking up in the night and you're a bit cold, you can put on more peats. There's plenty of them. So he thanked her and she went off to her bed. And in the morning, he got up and he was walking towards the door and he stopped and he looked around and he looked at Molly and he said, that stuff you gave me to eat last night? Yeah. Was that really the only food you had in the house? She says, that was it. And today we don't even have as much as that. He says, well, it takes a very special kind of person to share the last food they have in the world with a stranger. You have my blessing. And he went out. Well, she says to her oldest boy, go out and fetch a basket of peats. If we're going to starve to death. We might as well do it in comfort, you know, we'll get the fire blazing. So he brought in a basket of peats, and the fire had died down, it had burnt down. So if you put a great big slab of peat on it, it wouldn't burn, it would just smother it. So she had to snap it in two to make it a bit smaller so that it would catch, it would burn. So she got the peat and she broke it in two, and tink, something fell out of it onto the floor. And she looked down, and it was a coin. It was a gold coin. Molly had never seen a gold coin before, yet alone touched one. She picked it up and she looked at it. More money than she'd ever seen. She took another peat and snapped it, and tink, another coin fell out, and tink, another one, tink, 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 tink. Every peat she broke had a gold coin in it. And then she understood what the trowel meant by having his blessing. And she says to her oldest boy, she says, run down to the shop and get some bread and some butter and cheese and some ham and some sausages and tea and strawberry jam. Do you remember strawberry jam? Just anything you want, just go and get it. And he ran down and he came back with all this food, and they ate like they had never eaten before. And every time that Molly broke a peat after that, it had a gold coin in it. Now, people started wondering where Molly's getting all this money from. I mean, there she was, poor as a church mouse one day, and then now she's got gold coins to flash around, you know. And nobody wondered more than the old woman who lived up the hill. So she went down one evening to spy on Molly, and she looked through the window and she saw her snapping a peat and a gold coin falling out of it. And she thought, ha ha, so that's her game, is it? Trowie money, I bet. Well, I deserve trowie money too. I'm a poor old woman. I deserve some of that. I should have some of that. I'm entitled to some of that. So she went back to her house and she waited until the lights went out in Molly's. And then she put a cashew on her back and she went down the slope, down the hill, down to Molly's peat stack. And she stole a basket full of peats and she took it up the road, up the hill. And she tipped them out on the kitchen floor, and then she went back for another one. And she tipped that out, and she went back for a third, and a fourth, and a fifth, until it started getting light. She went back and forth all night until the sun started to rise, and she thought she might be seen. So then she's got a big mound of peats in her house, and so she thinks, right, now it's time to get rich. So she picked up a peat and she snapped it, and squeak! It wasn't a gold coin that fell out of it. It was a mouse, a live mouse, scuttled off to the corner of the room. She thought, a dud. I'll try another one. So she broke another peat, and squeak! Another mouse came out of it, and then squeak, 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 squeak. Every time she broke a peat, it had a live mouse in it. Now, all the mice gathered in the corner of the room. And they had a wee meeting, you know, very democratic animals are mice. And they said, well, I don't know about you lot, but I'm hungry. What's to eat around here? Oh, look, there's a press full of bread and butter and cheese and ham and puddings and pies and pots of jam. So off they went. And they swarmed all over the old woman's press, and they ate every scrap of food she had in the house. And then they set to the house itself and all the furnishings, and they nibbled holes in everything, and all the furniture and the walls, the skirting boards, the curtains, everything in the house was just full of holes. It looked like a Swiss cheese inside. And the old woman had nothing left. And so she had to take a staff in her hand, and she took a kishie, which was full of holes as well, but she pulled some dried grass from outside and twisted it up and shoved in the holes. And then she went down to Molly's house to beg. She knocked on the door. The oldest boy answered it. He looked at her and he says, what do you want? She says, oh, please take pity on a poor old woman. You see, I've had a terrible plague of mice up at the house. I don't know how it happened, but I've got all these mice and they've eaten everything I have. They've eaten all my food and they've destroyed all my furniture and beds and everything is gone. And so I wonder if you could spare you something to eat. The boy looked at her and he says, "Old woman, I'll give you what you gave us when we were hungry and came begging. Nothing." And he slammed the door in her face. But Molly was standing in the corner of the room and she shook her head and she said, "No, son, I told you, we're better than that. We share." And she went over to the door and she said, old woman, come back, come back." She says, "I'll give you as much food as you can carry up the hill to your house. And I'll make you this promise as well. As long as I'm alive, you will never go hungry." So that is the story of Mali in the Trow. And I think it's a story for our age.
A wonderful story, Tom. Um, well, I don't know if you know this, but it's I organize with friends, with storytelling friends, every year different ones. I organize an advent calendar called Words of Kindness,
Mm,
and there are all stories of kindness, generosity, and well, so I heard many many stories of kindness and generosity, but this just touched my heart.
mm.
It was brilliant, and maybe you could tell it next year.
Yeah, of
I'll
course.
keep it in mind.
Hmm. Well, actually, one thing that happened during lockdown, because I mean, I was working at the museum and then there was mutterings about, I wonder if the museum will close. And I thought, nah, of course it won't. And then they said, right, we're going to close on Friday. It's like, oh, okay. And I was expecting, oh, okay, week off, 2 weeks, 3 at the most, you know. It was 2 years before we really got back to normal and you know, went in. I was doing as much work from home as I could. But the one thing was I wanted to try to help people get through that time, you know, because it's just, I can imagine people, I had friends who were shielding, so they were not seeing anybody at all. I mean, nobody was seeing anybody unless you worked for government, in which case it was free for all. But I mean, you know, everybody else, we were all stuck at home. And so I thought, well, if all I can do is tell stories. So I started recording stories every day, and that's on the Ornithology website. It's called Tales for Troubled Times, and I started recording stories from Orkney, and then I started, you know, from around Europe and Scandinavia, and it ended up being, I don't know, somewhere about 180 folk tales, which range from a few minutes to 2 hours. So, and Marley and the Trout was obviously in there as well. So it's my favorite story.
Yeah.
Now, I'm the boy in the story. I would need a
Hmm?
mother. I'm the boy in the story. I would need a mother to teach me better. I'd
Mm.
be the boy.
I would like to think that I would be Molly, but no, I would probably be the boy as well, you know. But she knew better
Yeah, of course.
and taught him better. So
Yeah. The ideal of
mm,
how we should be.
yeah,
Mm.
I mean, if you can help somebody, I mean, I was brought up in quite a different society because when I was a kid, there was still the end of a way of life which doesn't happen anymore. Farmers all had to get together and help each other because they would buy, between a group of people, you would buy an implement like a baler for baling hay. And then that would be kept at one farm, and then it would go around all the different farms, and all the people would go around with it to act as a labour force. And you would, of course, be fed at that house. So I remember when I was a kid, you know, all these people around the table, and the main meal was in the middle of the day, and that was the way that we were. And I was always brought up that you should help people. You shouldn't have to think about it. It's just what you should do. You should help people. And if you can help somebody, why wouldn't you? So that's how I was brought up. So
But yeah, but still, even if you are raised like that, in that story, it's like when you're raised like that, it's like giving and receiving. Um, it's not one-sided. My point is. So I totally get the boy. Anyway, but carrying on because we have very short time left, I wanted to ask you about the Orgneology podcast. Would you like to
ah,
tell us a bit about that?
well, you see, Rhonda kept going on about we should have a podcast, and I went, yeah. And she would say, no, I really think we should, yeah. Well. And so we began in January 2024. And the first few ones was just like me and Rhonda talking. And then we started inviting guests. And it's all friends from not just storytelling, but predominantly storytelling. There is some on archaeology and all that in there as well, but mostly it's storytellers. And there's a singer as well of Scottish bothy ballads. So it's northeast Scottish tradition. And he sang songs. And so we've got people that talk about how they got into storytelling and the storytelling from the area that they come from, and of course, telling stories as well. And ended up getting longer and longer the whole time. So it's about 2 hours or more than 2 hours now. So yeah, it's a bit of a mixture. This year, we had just a couple of days ago, it's called Over with the Moon, which is an old Orkney expression, over with the moon, hour with the moon. And it's what people used to say, I'll be over with the moon, I'll come and visit you. And it was in winter, because summertime you were working in hay and stuff like that. You were busy the whole time. In the winter, in the dark evenings, because it gets dark here very early in winter and doesn't get very light for. So you would wait until the night of the full moon, and then you would go visiting because you could see where you were going. Because this is before the days of torches or anything like that. So you would wait until there was enough natural light for you to be able to travel at night. And so it comes out on the night of the full moon every month. And so this month we have Simon Haywood, who is talking about Arthurian legends. So there's quite a few people that you would probably know as well from storytelling circles in there, and there's a lot more that we'll be getting our hands on as well. So, but it's good fun, I have to admit. I mean, to start with, I thought, oh God, I can't be committed to something like that, and I enjoy it now. So it's really nice just having it's a really laid back conversation. It's just a chat.
Great. So, Simone, we forgot to say how season 2 of our podcast is under Galway's wing. So, Get a Word in Edgeways, the festival organized by Mike Rust in Muchwenlock, has adopted us this season. And we're supposed to blow their trumpet in every episode, and we mustn't forget. So, Tom would like to thank you kindly for your presence and warm-hearted presentation of the Orkney legacy, and you carrying the tradition on at your place. You have our full support. Carry on doing what you do. You do it well. You and Rhonda.
Thank you.
You're wonderful.
A great pleasure to be asked. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was brilliant to learn all about what you're doing. Very inspiring.
you.